So thank you for coming to listen to me today. I'm going to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is engineering happiness. So it is a double entendre. I thought actually about giving this talk from bed, since there is one conveniently located here, and I normally work remote, so it would be very in character. But I think I'll just stand here. It's fine. So, if you ever, something wrong with scaling. That's all right. If you ever took a software engineering class in college, you probably had a textbook, and the first page of the textbook probably had a diagram that's something like this. It said, systems consist of software, process, and people. And then it'll spend 1,000 pages talking about the first two things. This conference, we spent a lot of time talking about how to monitor the software, and to some extent the hardware, and a lot of stuff on the process, and we don't talk a lot about how to monitor people. Sounds kind of creepy, but that's not where I'm going here. So, the hypothesis for today is that engineering happiness is important, right? Because I want my job to be humanistic. I want to be working with happy people, and I myself would like to be happy. So to begin with, we need to think about what are the things that make engineers happy, right? So my starting hypothesis is that if people are happy, they don't quit. They produce lots of code, or whatever it is they're supposed to be producing, and they don't complain. There's some kind of basic assumptions in there. We assume that people are basically good at their jobs, and a good fit for their jobs, right? They're in a job where they are set up to do a good job, that they are intrinsically motivated, and that they are a reasonable fit. So, some basic assumptions. So, how do we measure those things? I'm really going to have to fix this, sorry, I have no idea how. So, give me a second. Sorry, actually, my girl said slides, and I was like, no idea why it looks like that. So, 1 second. This way it is. Let's try like that. Doesn't work. All right. Well, let's just run with it. I can see the slides. So people don't quit. So the basic metric for that is retention or turnover, which is really sort of the way we measure whether people have quit or not. This is a really sucky metric. And the reason that it really sucks is that it trails, right? You've got leading indicators, you have trailing indicators. Turnover is an extremely trailing indicator. By the time somebody has quit, you've lost all opportunity you had to fix it, basically. All you can do is hire somebody else and try not to piss them off. So, having said that, you know, what are you comparing it to, right? In Silicon Valley, the mean turnover is like 30%. Probably a little higher, that's what HR tells me it is. And what are you comparing it to? If you look at your company and say, no people have ever quit this company, is that because there are 2 of you working there and you are the co-founders? At some point, if you're a startup, somebody is going to leave you, right? Because they have a better opportunity, because they, you know, in the best possible world, because they want to start their own company, because they want to go to grad school, they want to stay home and have babies, whatever it is, right? Some people's going to leave you, no matter how awesome a place it is to work. So what you're really interested in is change, like delta in turnover. And delta in turnover is an even more trailing indicator, right? It's so far behind everything else. So spikes are interesting. If you say last year our turnover was 6% and this year it is 20%, something changed, right? Is it just that your company grew? Did something bad actually happen? And also, it was a year ago. What are you going to do about it? So, when is turnover useful? Main thing is look for anomalies. So spikes probably aren't going to be expect to you, but local maxima, right? If you have a manager working at your company and all of their people quit, this is something you should pay attention to. But there's kind of a more subtle thing than that, which is it junior people that are quitting? Do they have the same retention rate? Is it senior people? Is it only the engineers that quit? Like the salespeople stay forever while all the engineers continue to leave? Is it only management? Because those things all have kind of slightly different implications for you. So the point being, turnover is a very coarse number, and I don't recommend it as an indicator, but if that's all you have, then start digging. So, there's an assertion we get in the industry that people leave managers, not jobs, and that's certainly true, right? Bad managers, people quit. And people also seek out good managers to work on. They will follow a good manager to another jobs, that's one thing. But there are other reasons that people quit that have little to do with management. One is that the company or the project or the culture jumps the shark, right? And I could define this all day. Probably most of you know what I mean. It might mean that the company pivoted to something you don't care about. It might mean that you like working at a small company and your company suddenly became a big company. It might mean that you like early stage startups and now you're a public company and it's not fun. You have too much process. Might mean that your CEO changed and you don't like the new one. It might mean any kind of these kinds of things, right? Like you stop making money. That's actually a pretty good one. Like you're a market leader, suddenly you are failing, people leave in swarms. Another really good one is that you stop learning and there's not much else to learn at this job. This particularly happens, I think, with small companies. You've kind of, you know everything there is to know and it's not your company. It's kind of a limit to what you can do. Burnout is a classic one. Sometimes you get a better offer. You know, somebody reels a truckload of cash up to your door and says, please come and work at Facebook. Oh, sorry, but you know what I mean. But, you know, a good manager can mitigate a lot of these things, right? A good manager can sort of insulate you from bullshit. They can provide you opportunities to work on projects that stimulate you. They can, you know, sort of work with you to avoid burnout. But at some point, there's only so much they can do, right? So people will leave. So productivity is another happiness metric. It is a critical happiness metric for a single person, right? If I see that someone is very productive and suddenly they're not productive, something has happened. That's really obvious. But how does this look over the big picture? As a macro measure, how useful is this? I'm going to be sad if you can't see this picture. All right, you can see enough. So this is kind of a cool graph. It is, can't see the dates. This is 2010, and over here, this is now, the drop at the end is an artifact, so don't worry about that. But this is all of the commits to Firefox's Mercurial server over the last 5 years. We also have, we're now down to 3 version control systems, but we did have 5 up until this. And the reason that, I take personal credit for that. The reason I have HG here as opposed to GitHub, which is the other really big one, is it's easier to aggregate, right? We have a lot of, like thousands of repos and several orgs on GitHub, and this is all in one place. So, I'll show you some interesting things. We shipped Firefox 4, this was before we went to rapid releases, and that was like a really big push. It took us like 3 years to ship Firefox 4, and at the end of that, everybody was really burnt out, which is what this dip is. This is like a month where nobody did anything. That's what happens, right? Like those big releases, if you've been involved in one, they will burn out everybody. And then we switched to doing rapid releases, so we started shipping every 6 weeks. It's pretty interesting. The big dips you can see at Christmas, right? A lot of people take, sometimes we get given 2 weeks off over Christmas, sometimes people take a couple of weeks off over Christmas, those are the big dips. The big peak there is October. It's FX10, which was like the 10-year anniversary of Firefox, and we shipped a whole bunch of stuff like that. Developer tools and a new theme, and that was our most productive month ever. What's really interesting about this is since 2012, so roughly here, we haven't increased the number of engineers that we have. That's the same thing, right? Producing more stuff. So that's kind of cool. It points to something, but I'll tell you, it doesn't point to better morale, because I think probably the last couple of years is the most stressed we've ever been. Interesting. The other thing is, the reason I got into this data, at the start of last year, we had kind of some, what I would describe as drama. There's a lot of media, I'm not going to talk about that. But I will point it out where it is on the graph. It's this little dip here. The reason I dug up this data was I thought, does this kind of incident that is like an earthquake in your culture, it's a cultural segfault, it leaves like a brand in your brain that you're never going to get over, how much does it affect productivity? And the answer is stuff all. Christmas is worse. So, it doesn't mean that people are happy. So, moving along. Productivity, apparently gross productivity, not a fantastic metric for happiness. The third thing that we talked about, don't quit, write lots of code, don't complain. Let's talk about complaints. So there's a well-known VC who is actually on our board, lovely guy called Bob Lisbon. And one of the things he said to a friend of mine once, ran a startup, was, if the worst thing that the engineers have to complain about is the art hanging on the walls, then you're not doing too much wrong. Probably didn't have this art in mind. But I kind of want to modify that. If the only thing they're complaining about is the art hanging on the walls, then you're probably okay. Complaints is a volume measure, right? So if people are only complaining about art, it's not a big deal. If they start complaining about everything, it's kind of it's a little bit of a warning thing. So how do you measure complaint volume? So the same way that you measure user happiness, right, or customer happiness, you can do sentiment analysis. If you have internal channels, mailing lists, Slack, Basecamp, Yammer, whatever it is, you can look at those things If you are so inclined, you can write a script that crawls them and says, have complaints increased in the last month? What is the complaint versus, happiness, I would say compliment ratio. Who are the people who are complaining the most and has it changed? Like, did they always complain that much from the beginning, or have they suddenly gotten really happy about something? You can write a script. You can just read it as well, because it gives you a pretty good feel for the vibe. Second thing is silence. People who don't say anything, particularly if they have been vocal in the past, it means they checked out. So again, overall, it's about particular individuals, but the overall sort of ratio can give you a feel. So having talked about those three things and said, well, none of these things are fantastic metrics. What are better metrics for happiness? What are leading indicators as opposed to trailing indicators like people quitting? So here are some. Hours worked is a really phenomenal leading indicator, right? If it is increasing over time, people are going to get less happy over time. And I was so delighted to see, I think it was Runscope about yesterday, like, here are the hours that people work. I was like, yes, that's really good. Pretty much guess that the people who work, they're probably relatively happy. So that's a good thing. The amount of downtime that you have, if you graph your uptime, there's a company, a vendor that I am familiar with, that a co-worker of mine described as, they wouldn't know a 9 if it jumped up and bit them in the face. Pretty sure that the people working there, not very happy. Because if your pager is going off all night long, like, first of all you get angry, then you get sad, then you stop caring at all, and you quit. So it's a good leader. Technical debt. If you have ground to mine some code over the last 2 or 3 years and haven't spent any time cleaning up technical debt, people are going to get progressively less happy, especially people who come after that do have to clean it up. Stock price is the market share. It's kind of a silly one, but if you have a public company or if you have IPO and people have stock, if the share price goes down, so does happiness, because people are looking at how much money they earn and how much money they're worth, and if suddenly they're worth less, that's not a motivator. Market share is also a thing. If you work for the company that is the market leader, you're probably pretty happy when that company, think about sort of search engines over time, or sort of internet giants that are no longer internet giants. Let's say AOL, right? Pretty sure people who work at AOL are not as happy as they once were. It's fair to say that. The one thing that's kind of interesting, I think technology coolness is kind of a horrible thing to talk about in an ops conference. Because I don't want to say, let's go and build everything with the shiny new technologies, because that might make some people happy and it will make everybody in this room full of hatred. But it's actually kind of the inverse of that. So if your technology is on the decline, your happiness is probably on the decline. If you are using something old and people don't like it anymore, then engineers start to feel like, oh, my skill's probably not that marketable, maybe I should move on to some company where I can write Haskell all day. If I can find such a company that exists. Or in counterpoint, I am writing J2E and I would rather die. So it is actually a factor, right? And if you started off writing a website in PHP when PHP was cool and now it's not, it's a thing, right? It is a thing and you have to invest in people to keep them happy. Next I'm going to show you a little game. I love this game. These graphs are from Glassdoor. They are a great indicator of happiness of a company. These are 4 companies and I call this Glassdoor Bingo. I'm not going to ask you to guess, but I will tell you that they're all companies that you have heard of. 2 of them involve a change in leadership, which are the 2 bottom ones. Change in leadership, change in leadership. The one at the top left is post-IPO. Usually, it doesn't go back far enough for me to get the IPO, but IPO is usually like, yay, we all made a lot of money, and then people kind of get bored. And new people join the company and they're not as rich as the people already working at the company, and the contrast tends to make the new people kind of cranky. And that top right one, I have no idea what happened to that company. I was like looking at random companies that I tend to follow, or follow people that work there on Twitter, and some of the people here work at that company. I don't know what happened to you guys in 2013, but it wasn't good. I think it was outside investment, but I'm not sure. So, Glassdoor Bingo is fun. What else can you do? Technical debt. This is a pull request that landed on one of my projects last week. Yeah. I talked to lots of the guy that landed this over the last 6 months, and he's been kind of, I think it's fair to say he's not like bursting with hedonism. And this is, it's actually what it is it's an upgrade of Django. They broke backwards compatibility. So when you upgraded to the new version of Django, you had to change everything. It took them like 3 months. Yeah, I think he's really glad that he doesn't have to work on that anymore. This kind of stuff. If you let tech debt accumulate, right? This is not going to make people happy. I think that's probably like the worst pull request in the history of Mozilla. So, okay. What else do we have? So we talk a lot about monitoring. We talk a lot about analytics. And I think it's a fair assertion to say that analytics lead monitoring, all right? Monitoring is reactive, it's a trailing indicator, it is something is already broken. Analytics are designed to show you something is going to break, right? So you can kind of try and stop it from breaking before it does. That's kind of the idea. So what can I do for analytics or leading indicators in people? So surveys. There are lots of companies that will run you like an annual employee engagement survey. Those are kind of cool, but a little bit like an annual performance review. If you wait for the whole year and get somebody into your office and say, hey, you're really stuck and you're not getting a raise, that's really not a good way to manage performance. And an annual engagement review is maybe not the best way to manage engineer happiness. It will give you some qualitative information that you might not have gotten. And sometimes sort of taking the long view is useful, but it's not enough. So people are starting to build better analytics tools for humans, which I really like. So two I'm going to mention here. There's a thing called stand-ups, which we use, which is basically an IRC bot connected to a website. You tell the IRC bot what you're doing or what you're thinking, and it stores everything, and you can go to a website and search, which gives you a great place to do things like sentiment analysis. So that's a good starting point. Tiny Pulse is a startup that I really like. They give you like little daily employee happiness surveys. It's like a one-question thing. Like, how did you feel about this? Click on a star rating and move on. I like that, it's kind of cool. Haven't tried it, but I really want to. So, okay, that's analytics. Let's talk about what makes people unhappy. You can't see the caption on this. It says, unhappiness is usually due to ignorance of nature's laws. I was looking at like Creative Commons pictures for this, and I will tell you this picture is from a book, which is in the public domain, which is called Practical Eugenics. Thank you, Wikipedia. But it seems like something that would make people extraordinarily unhappy, so, All right. Next couple of things are donated by the authors. So, this is one. This is a guy who used to work for me. I have a lot of respect for him because he's been talking about this publicly, and he's now self-employed, right? So this is his company too. It kind of makes it even worse if it's just you and this is your work. So we call the anti-grey area depression, and I would say that when you have people working for you, you should look at their commit graphs, right? Because the thing I have found over time is that this is a pretty classic depression commit graph, and I see it all the time. Somebody's kind of doing some stuff, and then it kind of just fades away, and you might get like some little frenzies of activity where someone's like, oh shit, I'm going to like work really hard for next week, and everything will be okay, and then you just go, fuck it. I'm going to stay in bed and like be really depressed. And maybe at the end of that, I don't know what he did here. I don't know if he just got better, if he went to see a doctor or what, but this is better, right? Like it's just, I've also seen people changing jobs look like that. So burnout's a thing, but watch for it, right? It's usually not at all subtle. The one thing you'll see is this bursts of activities, right? Like you might see sort of fadey, burst of activity, fadey, burst of activity. And don't kind of look at an average, look at the pattern, because the pattern's really telling. One thing I have done with people who are in a state of burnout or depression or whatever is to say, look, here's something that you can work on that might help, which is that try to have a commit report request every second day, right? Because like it's very concrete, it doesn't have to be a big thing, just try and like keep doing something. And sometimes if you can do something, it helps you to feel better. So I want to contrast this with a different graph. Don't confuse it, it looks like this. Any ideas what this graph might represent? This is from another of my generous co-workers who said, yes, you can use my graph anonymously. Oh, you can't see it. Going into management. Can you see the point where this person got promoted to being an engineering manager? It's pretty obvious. Sorry, man. But yeah, so there are other patterns that can look really similar to depression. I just want to point it out. So another thing other than depression is burnout, and there's a lot of, if you read psychology textbooks, a lot of them sort of point out that burnout and depression are very different things, and I actually disagree with that. So here's a nice definition of burnout. and probably at least half the people in this room can identify with this, maybe a lot more than half. Put up your hands if you've been burned out or are currently burned out. All right, maybe it's like 99%. Okay, so burnout is chronic stress and frustration, not just acute stress of like wanting to kill the person that shipped that thing. That sensation enduring for 12 months. Okay, or longer. Leads to physical and emotional exhaustion. You're tired all the time. You've been so pissed off for so long that you just don't even care anymore, right? Like someone's like, oh, everything is down, you're like, so. Feelings of cynicism and detachment. It's kind of interesting. So good engineering managers can manage morale. And I would say, by the way, that there's sort of different ways to do this. And feelings of cynicism are very contagious. If you are any kind of like engineering or ops manager, be aware that what you have projects down for people that work for you. So you owe a lot to your team to keep your emotions under control, which makes you even more burned out, by the way. But it's important not to sort of communicate it to others or be contagious to others. And I would include in that the feeling of like, everything is shit, but we're all in it together, is actually not that helpful. Okay. A sense of ineffectiveness. Nothing I do is going to make a difference. So, burnout and depression, yes, technically they are two different things. And some of the things that you read will say, the difference between burnout and depression is, with burnout, you can go away from work and be happy. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure that's actually true to some extent. And they bleed, like if you're burned out for long enough, you're going to be depressed. I'm pretty like, there is no science in this, but by large amounts of anecdotal evidence, I consider this to be true. So what causes burnout? I think this is not science, not rocket science. Long hours, too many pages, too much travel, that's my personal one. This is the only conference I'm speaking at this year. Too much bullshit. The one you can't see at the bottom is FOMO. Feeling like you're missing out on seeing your family, having a life, seeing your friends, opportunities, especially if you're working at a company where everything is shit. All your friends seem to be working on really cool projects, and they get to speak at conferences, and they get to write stuff in Haskell, and you're like stuck in a dungeon writing Perl 5, 110 hours a week, while they're at like reInvent, and you see them tweeting pictures of them drinking cocktails at a bar in Vegas, and this is not going to make you happy, right? So those things called burnout. There's also what I think of as the GSD-BS ratio, the getting shit done versus bullshit ratio. I'm also Australian, by the way, so I think I may have outsworn James at this point. So, politics. Put up your hand if you consider yourself any sort of engineer, right? Ops engineer, dev engineer, QA engineer, whatever. Put up your hand if you like politics. Right. Did you keep your hand up? That's awesome. You're very afraid of this woman and like, okay. Okay, so politics take away a lot of like getting shit done time. Excessive meetings. And I don't mean like 2 meetings a week. I mean like having a conversation with a product manager where they say, the engineers aren't getting anything done. I said, why are you having 20 hours of meetings with them a week? Because they're not getting anything done and we need to discuss it. All right. Cargo cult process. We have always done these things this way, and I don't see any reason to change. Like, why would we change the thing that's been working for us for so long? Why do we do it that way? There were really good reasons, historical reasons. Or as a co-worker of mine calls them, hysterical raisins. But cargo cult process, right? We build the plane before we ship, because that's what we always do. And technical debt, which I've talked about. So those are the things that make people unhappy, right? What makes people happy? Oh, you can't see. So this is Mozilla's hierarchy of needs. Actually, caffeine is at the bottom, so I'm really sorry. Caffeine, Wi-Fi, button tools, t-shirts, open bar. Right. Am I wrong? Right. I didn't tell this, but it's not wrong. So what are things that make people happy? There is a great book which I really like, and another talk that I give about engineering management, I've talked about it a lot, which is a book by Dan Pink. It's called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. He says there are 3 basic things: mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Mastery means the opportunity to be good at what you do and to get better at what you do and to learn, right? Autonomy is choice over tasks and the way in which they are done. Letting engineers figure out what the most important thing is for them to be working on. And finally, purpose, feeling like you're working on something important. This third one, I mean, every startup in the world has figured out this. Because if you go and look at like their hiring page, they'll say, we're changing the world of anime meetups or whatever it is, right? Like it's just purpose. If you feel like you have a higher motivation, it's how non-profits get away with not paying people as well, right? Because purpose is important. Feeling like what you do makes the world a better place will make you put up with an awful lot of bullshit. So, what else makes people happy? There's a thing called Hertzberg's two-factor theory, and now I'm going to talk about 1950s industrial psychology. Sorry. So Hertzberg was a dude. He studied a lot of engineers actually in the 50s, so not necessarily our kind of engineers, but more kind of probably a lot of automotive engineers and mining engineers, given that it was in Pennsylvania. And he said there are two basic factors in sort of happiness at work. The first one is what he calls hygiene, and he does not mean your co-workers have showered recently. That's certainly like a detractor. So hygiene covers things like the work environment. Do you have a good machine to work on? Do you have appropriate software tools to, does your boss say yes, you will pay for whatever analytics tool you want? Yes, you can have a new MacBook, whatever it is. Are there good enough snacks in the micro kitchens? I sort of make jokes about this, but we have Yammer, and there was like a 6-month Yammer thread on the snacks in the micro kitchens. No, we did not switch to silent, which was one of the proposed solutions. Management policies, right? So does your management seem competent? Do they have irrational policies or sensible policies? Do they pay you enough? Do they have reasonable health insurance? Are you safe at work, or are you like sitting at a laptop in an open coal mine or something? So the slide line at the bottom, which you can't see, says messing these things up makes people unhappy. My other half used to work at a company that had like open plan office, and this is just very anecdotal because it kind of tells the story. And all of the engineers sat in cubes in the open plan office, and they were like the call center kind of cubes, like they don't have the full height walls. They have like what I think it was like the spittle screens, so that like when you're talking on the call center phone, you don't spit on the person opposite you, but it's only like this tall. Okay, and the biz dev and salespeople had busting offices around the edge of like the engineering bullpit, except when the salespeople and the VP of Biz Dev would come out and play touch football in between the engineers' cubicles. And sometimes they'd be like sitting there coding with their headphones on, a football would hit them in the back of the head. And this is kind of like the epitome of how to do this badly. Okay, so the second side of the point other than hygiene is motivation. Right, so this is achievement and recognition. I don't mean employee of the month awards. I mean, wow, you did a really good job. Why don't you go and talk about what you did at Monitorama or something, right? Like, giving people interesting stuff to work on, and particularly with that, like if somebody says, I have this cool idea, can I try this, giving them space to do it. Learning new stuff, having the opportunity to grow and to advance. And if you get these things right, it actually makes people happy. And I have a graph, I hope the whole thing shows. Okay. So there are 4 quadrants in the motivation hygiene graph. So high motivation, high hygiene. If you have terrible motivation and terrible hygiene, then your workplace is terrible. It is a pile of poo. If you have high motivation and high hygiene, it's a great place to work. If you're really well paid, but it's kind of there's no opportunity to grow and there's nothing very exciting to work on, but you're getting a great paycheck. It's just a paycheck, but you're basically pretty happy. You won't quit, you'll just kind of bumble along. And there's a lot of big government jobs are in this bucket. And over there, where we have people who are like really motivated to change the world and disrupt turtle racing. Well, earning $30,000 a year for 0.01% of equity in the eventual leader in the turtle racing market. That's an early stage startup. So you kind of get an idea for how these two factors interact. Just good things to have in your mind, like how to work those things to make people happier. So one final thing I'm going to talk about is kind of what I think of as engineer personality typing, which is how to get people working on stuff that makes them happy. Because the same things don't make everyone happy. Some things do, right? We like to go to a place where the building's not falling down around our ears, where we're getting paid, where we're working on something interesting. But there are some things that make some people happy and some people very unhappy, right? Let's go back to Haskell. So there's kind of I've come up with sort of personality typing of engineers, which you cannot see the bottom of. I'll talk through these things. So what kind of engineer are you? And think about this for yourself, and think about this for people in your team. There are senior engineers and junior engineers, and they're probably happier working on different kinds of stuff, right? If you have very senior engineers twiddling knobs on Nagios or churning out private web applications for ungrateful clients, probably not very happy. Junior web engineers or junior ops people, relatively happy doing that because they haven't done it before. It's new and they're still going to get something out of it, even if it is only like an appreciation for how much monitoring sucks. The second thing is structured and chaotic, and I think that I look around this room full of people who like open source tools, and I will tell you that we are mostly in the chaotic camp. Ops people are more towards the structured end of the chaotic camp, but we're still in the chaotic camp. People who like structure are the kind of people who feel very disturbed if they do not have a project plan, right? Like people who like to have like sprint planning, they want to know how many points of stuff they're working on this week. And if they don't have that, they're a little freaked out. And then there are people who, if you ask them to do that, would like to kill someone. I'm in that camp, by the way. Go and have your planning meeting and I'll be over there drinking. Team players and learners. So I work remote, and that is like a very strong personality typing thing. I'm actually an extrovert, I'm also a team player, so it's not necessarily correlated. But I will tell you that some people are not people. All they really want to do is sit in a cave and talk to computers all day, right? And if you send one of those people to like a team building trust falls thing, like, do I have to explain this to you? But people persist in doing this. You know, if we just rip this guy out of his like cabin in Montana where he's building bombs to mail to people and force him to go to like a trust fall seminar, he'll be really happy. No, he'll still be the Unabomber. Right. But there's no value in those Unabomber engineers, right? Like some of those people are geniuses. And you still want to be working for you. This don't make me angry, right? The next one's interesting. So I've talked about this a lot, I think, in the past, which is that there's kind of a spectrum between purists and pragmatists. Purists, you probably have some of these on your team. They don't want to ship it till it's perfect. They want it to be done right. They probably like projects like working on a new programming language, compiler design, what else? They like languages like Rust and Erlang and Haskell. Pragmatists. A lot of people are pragmatists. They just want to ship something. They would rather ship something that wasn't perfect than not ship it at all. In fact, if you take it to the extreme end of the spectrum, they would rather ship a steaming pile of shit than not ship at all. I'm in this camp, I'm so sorry, but I am. Pragmatists like Perl and Bash and PHP and Go, because Go is the new one of those things, and I'm sorry. So this is really important. If I take that purist and get them to work for like a web agency writing client websites in Drupal, how long do you think they're going to last? Similarly, if I take that pragmatist and say, please go away and design me a new programming language, they'll be looking at you like they're insane, and then they'll go work at Facebook. So, this is really important, and there's a degree of this. The other important thing about this is you need both these kinds of people, because if you only have purists, you will never ship this perfect thing that will always be in beta. And if you only have pragmatists, you will ship a steaming pile of crap. So you need those people to moderate each other. The one you can't see at the bottom is starters and finishers. And this is not my idea. I stole this from a guy I work with called Mark Finkel, who runs the Firefox mobile teams. So FedEx and Firefox and iOS. And he says, can I make a new browser in about 6 to 9 months? He says. And then he goes and screams and sends it to someone. No, sorry, Mark. You know I love you. But he came up with this great idea of like starters and finishers. He said, when I'm looking to hire people for a project, I know there are two kinds of engineers. There are people who are really good at starting projects. So think about which one of these you are. Those are people who start your open source projects. Their GitHub account is full of like started cool side projects. They are great people for kicking things off. They have tons of ideas and they get bored really easily. So incredibly creative, really good at the first 50%. What are they bad at? Operationalizing stuff, shipping stuff, and polish. Okay. Finishers, part of the reason I really like this as a dichotomy is because I'm such a finisher. For years and years and years I had like the worst imposter syndrome about like, I never start like new open source projects. I just like go and fix things that bug me in other people's ones. That's a finisher. In fact, there was like one guy that I used to work at Mozilla and I felt like I was following around the company for a time shipping things that get started. I'm like, we can't operationalize this, how am I supposed to monitor this crap? And we finish the code and ship it and I would feel good. So that's really important, and you need both of those people too, right? So there's kind of important things here is try and find people to work on, stuff to work on that they will be good at. And just because you suck at something doesn't mean that you're going to suck at everything else, right? Like I think sometimes we have this idea that someone was fired because they're a terrible person or a terrible engineer, and the answer might be that you took a pragmatist and asked them to write like a you know, a new programming language or whatever it is, something that really didn't suit them, and they just flailed. Okay, so think about that as you go through. People that work for you maybe aren't doing that well. What could they be doing that they would be better at? So, that's all I have to say. Upwards, to the right, and straight on till morning. And I will happily take questions. Are there any questions, or are you all terrified? Oh, right in front row. Hi!
Who was the top right company?
The top right company? Oh, I don't want to say, actually, because I think, but if you go, like, just go blinking glass, because it's actually really interesting, especially thinking about changing jobs, right? It's useful. Any other questions? Who was the top right company? You can play this game at parties also. I can really, like, it slots really nicely in with DevOps Against Humanity.
Do you have time to tell us your Haskell story?
Haskell story. I have a whole bunch of Haskell stories. So, no. But in answer to your question, actually didn't hire one of the best interns we've ever had, because although he was working on a programming language search engine that uses static analysis, not pure enough for him. Go on.
In that last slide where you have the different types of people, do you ever see correlations like between those? So if you're a pragmatist, you're also a starter or something like that?
That's a good question. No, I don't think so. Yeah, just around the project. So a pragmatist who is a starter might start like a new monitoring platform, right? Like something that's very pragmatic, but they're just not going to kind of finish it. They'll probably stay in like 0.1.1, 0.1.2, and they'll use it, and they'll say, you can use this at your own risk, and actually I think a lot of projects like that. Yeah. One more question, yep.
How many good books to recommend on?
Good books to recommend on this sort of stuff. That's a really good question. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of like industrial psychology stuff. It's funny. Somebody I follow on Twitter here said, I feel like a lot of stuff that we do in DevOps is pretty original in engineering management. Like I feel like we're actually pushing the state forward, which is nice. But no, I don't think we do good books to recommend. Drive is a good one by Dan Pink. Other than that, go wild, read blogs, Twitter, talk to people here because they know stuff. That's it.